In the Perspectrum podcast, we discuss controversial topics. Outside of this context, Michael and I are both working professionals. While doing this show, we are not acting as agents or representatives of our respective institutions, and none of the views that we express reflect the outlooks of our employers. So don't come to my office and throw toilet paper at me.
And I don't have an office, but don't come to my cube. Hello and welcome to the Perspectrum. I'm Michael Bloom.
And I'm Nathan Seelove.
Today we've got a pretty broad range of topics for you that I think is going to be for a really interesting episode. So we'll start off by recapping some thoughts on the VP debate last week. Then we'll move into a discussion of Trump's nominee for the Supreme Court, Amy Coney Barrett, and some of her recent hearings this week. And then we'll finish up by having a discussion about a concept called stochastic terrorism and its relationship to the attempted or plotted kidnapping of the governor of Michigan.
And the governor of Virginia as well.
And it hits close to home. I know people that work in his office.
Yeah, I don't even like him that much, but I don't want him kidnapped.
Yeah, exactly. But to start off, we will talk a little bit about the COVID numbers.
Yeah, as usual.
So worldwide, we've had a total of 39.1 million cases, which is up from 36.3 million last week, which is nearly an 8% increase week over week, which is the biggest single week increase we've seen in a while. We've had 1.1 million deaths worldwide, which is up from 1.06 million last week, which is a 3.8% increase, which of course will likely see an increase in this death rate as a result, as it flows from the increase in cases. So in the next few weeks, we might see greater week over week increases in death. Currently, 8.7 million people in the world are sick with the disease, which is up from 7.9 million active cases last week. And that's a 10% increase in active cases. So far, 22% of COVID patients are still sick with the disease, 2.8% have died from it, and 75% have recovered. And now in the U.S., we've had a total of 8.2 million cases, which is up from 7.8 million last week, which is a 5.1% increase, which is generally aligned with where we've been, although a number of states are seeing increases in their daily average case rate. Now, 223,000 people have died at this point in the U.S., which is up from 216,000 last week, or a 3.2% increase in total deaths. So yes, if you did that quick mental math, that's an additional 7,000 people died from this disease since you heard from us last.
Ouch.
Yeah. Currently, we've got 2.7 million people currently sick with the disease, which is up from 2.6 million last week, which is a 3.8% increase. So again, back to growing active case numbers. And in the U.S. at this point, 33% of all COVID cases are still active, with 2.6% of people having died and 65% of people having recovered. So remember that 33% of all COVID cases in the U.S. that have ever existed, those people are still sick. So if anybody's trying to tell you that we're on the back end of this disease or we're almost out of it,
that's a sizable chunk, considering the fact that we've been in this for almost a year at this point.
Yeah, exactly.
Jeez, exactly. Over 30%? That's insane.
Yeah. It's nuts. And so, I think that's a pretty good benchmark for figuring out kind of where we are.
Yeah.
So anyway, things are not looking great. And in the world overall, in the U.S., we're starting to see increases in cases as people are anticipating a bit of a potential second wave.
Yeah.
Yay.
God, I was talking to one of my bosses today about preparing for the next semester, and we were discussing the possibility, or we were basically discussing how it's possible that at least halfway through next semester, this might be over because of a vaccine. And I was starting to remember, oh yeah, there is life that exists outside of COVID.
Yeah.
There will be life after COVID, and there was life before COVID. I forgot.
It's gonna be really strange.
Yeah, it is. I feel like there's definitely going to be a lot more people still wearing masks even
Hmm.
after the COVID epidemic. I mean, one of the things that I was thinking was the next time I'm sick,
Yeah,
if I'm going to work like with just a flu or or a cold, if I still go to work, I'm wearing a mask, you
totally.
know. And
Yeah,
I think that's probably a good thing. It's
yeah,
probably a good thing that wearing a mask has become normalized to that specific point.
yep. I think that makes sense. Um, yeah, I worry that even after the disease is largely resolved, a lot of these like habits will kind of persist, and we'll still remain kind of worried about the disease because,
Yeah.
even if we have a vaccine, um, we don't know what the long term impacts are, and even if it's not death, even in mild cases, there's been some indication that like other physical and neurological impacts.
Yeah, that's true.
That's been terrifying to me lately. Like it's unlikely for me to die from this disease, but the idea that um, like me as a person and the way that I live my life could be subject to some kind of long-term chronic
Yeah.
ailment as a result of even a mild or asymptomatic case. That's really scary.
Yeah. Yeah. But I guess we shall see. In the meantime,
Yeah,
hey,
luckily our presidential candidates have a plan that's well articulated that they said on stage, right? No.
God. So, okay, the first thing that I want to say about the vice presidential debate is while I was waiting for it, I was sitting there just thinking, God, this is going to be so refreshing to see politics as usual, to see two competent politicians that can, speak with complete sentences that won't go off the
Hmm.
rails and yell and scream at each other about, ad hominems and stupid, irrelevant points. I was so excited for a return to normalcy. And then I started watching the debate and I realized, oh, that's right. I hate politics as usual.
You know what you should do? Start a podcast.
I should, and then criticize politics. I should
Yeah,
do that.
there we go. Win-win. Yeah,
So
I felt the same way. I was like, yes, fine. Like complete sentences, check. Like not ridiculous ad hominem, check. But like ultimately, now that they're able to actually get out the points that they're trying to make in full sentences, they're not great points.
yeah,
And a
they're
lot of
really
them
not
are
great
relevant.
points. A
Yeah.
lot of them are irrelevant. A lot of them are just talking points or stump speeches. And to be, to be frank, uh, a lot of the arguments were not arguments about their positions. They
Yeah.
were arguments about whether or not the other person held a position or not. So it wasn't talking about the content of positions, it was talking about the presence of
Yeah.
positions. And I hate that. I
Yeah.
really hate that. You know, it's like the argument devolved several times into, you support the Green New Deal. No, we don't support the Green New Deal. Yes, you definitely do support the Green New Deal. Instead of like, hey, here's my plan to deal with the environment. Here's your plan to deal with the environment. Let's argue about it. Let's talk
Hmm.
about the specifics. Let's discuss why my solution is better than your solution.
Yeah. I wrote at the top of my notes page when I was watching the debate, like halfway through, I just scrolled to the top and I just wrote, guys, start reading the policies on your website. It was like they didn't know
Yeah.
the specifics of what the heck they were going to go up and do once they were elected. Even from Harris, like there were a number of times when like Pence would make a point like, oh, you're not gonna raise taxes on everybody. Well then, but you're gonna undo the Trump tax cuts. Well, how is that not going to raise taxes on the middle class? Which is that is a summation of a few times when he tried to make that point.
Yeah.
But like, she didn't have a good answer. She didn't have an answer like, well, we're going to replace it with something else.
Yeah.
It was as if she wasn't sure. And she
Yeah.
just went back to the point about like, taxing the wealthy, which is a good point. But I thought it was a problem to have that kind of weak response because attacking the Trump tax cuts is good when you are making the point that we shouldn't be helping out corporations and the wealthy, which they did. But you can't really make that argument saying that no one benefited from them, because like the point is, like, people did feel those benefits. People felt the simplicity in the higher minimum deduction and stuff like that. Like those really did have like benefits in people's experience. And so to just say, oh, they're bad, is going to seem ingenuine to people.
Well, it is also important to note that a lot of the benefits were kind of short term, because that was more about we're withholding less of your paycheck, which meant that the rebates ended up being less.
Yeah.
But
also the
ended up
standard
having
deduction
bigger paychecks, ended up being more.
Yeah. And also they increased the standard deduction, which is like good for you and me because we don't take itemized deductions.
Yeah.
But doesn't have an impact on the wealthy. Like ultimately, like it did throw a pittance to the poor and then blew up our deficit and gave a bunch more to the rich and corporations, which is a point. But the important point to you and me or voters like us is that, we're going to raise taxes on the wealthy and we're going to do something. It doesn't have to be the Trump plan, but some plan for you guys.
Well, so the issue, I would actually slightly push back on your characterization of blaming Harris for that. I would actually blame Biden for that.
Yeah, no, fair enough. That is fair.
Because what Pence was hung up on was the fact that Joe Biden, in the debate, specifically said on day one, we're repealing the Trump tax cuts. That's what he was hung up on. And the thing is, if you look at Joe Biden's website, his tax plan, that's not necessarily true.
Yeah,
like,
totally.
It's
just the corporate tax cut.
Well, but even that though, like the Trump tax cut took the corporate tax from 35 to 21. Biden would just raise it to 28, which means
not a repeal.
That's not a repeal. So Pence was kind of doing a disingenuous red herring argument, but it was because Biden set him up to do that. And, that kind of put Harris in this awkward rhetorical position where, on one hand, Joe Biden said that they would repeal the tax cut. And I think the reason why he said that was because it sounds better rhetorically. But on the other hand, there are parts of the tax cuts that both she and Biden agree with and are okay with.
Yeah. I think they're also in an awkward place because of that point. Like they don't want to say that Trump has done something that is popular and that they agree with. Which, like, whether that's, I think maybe that's a political strategy, but I think it's a pretty weak one.
It's a dumb one.
It's a dumb one.
Okay, you can emphasize the whole, Democrats have always maintained that when necessary and when appropriate, it is completely reasonable to cut taxes on the middle class. I would, that's something that I would even personally agree with. When it's appropriate, cut taxes on the middle class, because putting more money into the hands of the middle class stimulates the economy more. When the rich get tax cuts, when the rich get more money, they just save it. In some cases they might invest it, which might lead to some additional stimulation. That's, I'll cede that point. But in order to have a vibrant economy, you do have to have people spending money. And the people that tend to spend money in a more balanced way is the middle class. So in some cases, it does make sense for economic stimulation to lower taxes on the middle class.
Yeah.
But the point is, the Trump tax cuts, after 10 years, 80% of all benefits go to the top 1%. That is what Harris needed to be hammering down on.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree. Like, I thought that it was awesome, yes, to see someone who could finish their point. Yeah. But I thought a number of her points were weaker than they should have been.
Yeah.
Things like climate, or things like taxes, things like climate, things, and just generally seeding the economy as a winning point to Republicans. I think she did a better job than some Democrats in the past with that. But like, I still think they need more work to like make more direct, punchy, like convincing arguments about how their policies are good for the economy. We don't have to make a trade-off between climate and the economy. We don't have to make a trade-off between healthcare and the economy. Like that's where Bernie had so much effective success, is like the economy is about you folks, and these policies are good for you.
And I was also reminded of Elizabeth Warren, where during the debate, when she was asked about the economy, she would always say, well, the economy's great if you're rich.
Yeah.
But,
strong.
if you're in middle America, it's not so great. And a huge reason for that is, and I believe this is a point that I made last week on the pod, is the fact that wages have remained stagnant for like the past 2-3 decades. Now, I also mentioned last week that it's very possible that the reason why Biden didn't make that point is because that also means that wages were stagnant under him and Barack Obama.
Sure.
But I would actually say that is a more important indicator of the economy. Because if the economy is doing, quote unquote, well, because we have a higher GDP, we have a lower deficit, which, we don't. It's completely blown up under Trump. Or if we have a high, good numbers for the stock market, that doesn't necessarily indicate how most Americans are doing financially. And as we've said repeatedly on the pod, the economy should serve the people, not the other way around.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So the thing is, Harris made herself very easy to criticize.
She did.
And the thing is, she didn't have to, because Mike Pence was lying his ass off the entire night.
Yeah, he was. But he did it so confidently.
Yeah, he did it so confidently. Like, people point to places in which Harris had abysmal non-answers. Like, the worst one I can think about was the one on Courtpacking, where she was asked about hers and Biden's position on Courtpacking, basically whether they supported the idea of increasing the number of justices to make up for the fact that there's going to be a 6-3 conservative majority on the Supreme Court if Coney Barrett ends up on the Supreme Court. And first she gave this, really stupid anecdote about Abraham Lincoln, which I'm pretty sure, like, based on what I've read, she mischaracterized it, which, again, is the absolute wrong argument, which is what Michael and I talked about last week, because the argument...
You don't have the facts on your side.
You don't have the facts on your side, and you're the hypocrite when you say that. Like, when you make the point, oh, no. The reason why we're doing this is because it's an election year. That makes you the hypocrite, because that's not what you were saying when it was Garland.
Yeah.
No, the argument you need to be making is this is Republican hypocrisy. They set the precedent. They're violating the precedent. That's the argument. That right there is the argument. And she didn't make that argument. And then when Pence pressed her on it more, she made this point about how Donald Trump has been appointing a bunch of lower court justices and all of them are white.
Yeah. I thought that was so weak. So in my mind, this is how it went. And this is how it did go. She literally said, let's talk about packing the court, then let's talk about it. I was like, oh, okay. All right. You're going to talk about packing the court. Let's do it. I'm ready. I'm ready for it. I'm here for it. And then she just doesn't. It was like she didn't have a plan for when the time came in 10 seconds when she actually had to talk about it.
How did they not prepare her for that?
I don't.
How?
Yeah, I know.
I mean, it's obvious that was going to be asked. It was asked in the previous debate. How are you not prepared for that? And look, if it's not that I don't think that there, is not a conversation to be had about lack of diversity in the nominees that Trump has appointed. And even beyond that, it's not like I don't think that there's a conversation to be had about how most of the appointments that Trump has been able to make in lower courts has been because Mitch McConnell has, held so many seats open during the Obama administration. That's absolutely a conversation to be had. But when you're using that as a deflection, it just comes across as so disingenuous.
Yeah. It's either you don't understand that court packing is a technical term.
Yeah.
And you just think it means filling up the court with stuff. Or you're intentionally misinterpreting and being evasive. And Yeah,
which is
I
clearly
thought,
what she was doing.
yeah, which is clearly what, yeah, she's way too intelligent and aware uh, to do
Yeah.
that. It was just so weak. And
And
it was, to your point, yeah, just like, you don't have a better answer?
yeah.
People have asked you guys literally like almost every day since RBG passed.
Yeah. And look, here's the answer. All right? Cuz like I understand the strategy here. The strategy is you don't want to say yes
Yeah.
and terrify people that, that'll lead to uh a new precedent that's going to create a bunch of partisan battles later. You don't
Mm-hmm.
want to say no because that's going to piss off your progressive base.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't answer. So here's what you say. Here's what you say is packing the court would be a terrible decision to make. And I really hope that we don't have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you say. Because that puts the ball in the courts of the Republicans. It's basically you saying, look, this would be terrible because it would violate precedent. It would lead to a bunch of partisan battles. Look, I was against court packing when it was first brought up in Democratic debates. I was very much with Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden against Mayor Pete when he was trying to make this point. But now it's kind of a situation of, look, they have decided that precedent means nothing. So Democrats need to decide that too, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, that's the response. And
Yeah, I think that, I mean, it's a strong one.
and again, like Mike Pence was lying his ass off the whole night. Like, Kamala Harris gave a lot of non-answers, gave, quite a few non-answers. Mike Pence gave only non-answers. Like,
Yeah, only fake answers. Like,
only fake answers. Some of them were like answers to, questions that were asked like two years ago in the debate. Like it was absolutely insane. And he was disingenuous. He was, he diverted attention. I mean, like at one point, Harris was criticizing the COVID response, and Mike Pence was just like, "Oh, I'm just so proud of the American people," and basically implying that when she was criticizing the COVID response, that she was criticizing Americans. It's like, no, we're criticizing you.
I
Are
know.
you kidding? Jeez,
Yeah.
you smarmy bastard.
I thought that to his audience that probably landed exactly how he wanted it to. It was like she said, yeah, whatever you've been doing for the past 8 months like hasn't been enough. And he was like, well, I think it's insulting to the American people to say what they've been through hasn't been enough. It's like, wow, you really pivoted on that foot, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about their answers to like the initial COVID question, because I thought that they were basically the model that they followed for the entire rest of the debate.
Yeah.
So the question was basically, when you, at least to Harris, was if you guys are elected, when you're the next administration, what will you do that Trump didn't do? And Harris's tact was to like cite a number of facts that didn't actually add up to a weak response necessarily by the Trump administration. Like, yes, 200,000 people dead is terrible. 8 million people infected is horrible. But until you anchor that to doing a worse job than other nations, like that argument doesn't necessarily flow through. So
Which
like
Biden did
good
do.
facts. Yeah, which Biden did do. Yeah, exactly. But like good facts, the point didn't necessarily land.
Yeah.
And she didn't answer the fundamental, most important part of the question, which is like, what are you going to do that's going to be better? And I thought that was kind of like a good outline for most of her answers, like some good information, not necessarily an answer to the question that we want to know the answer to. And then Pence's response was basically just lying his ass off. And the last part of Harris's answer is just some like a zinger on the administration, like calling the COVID response the biggest failure of any presidential administration in history or something like that.
Yeah.
But on Pence's side, it was basically, oh, like look at this one thing that may or may not have made a difference, which in this case was stopping travel from China, and then taking all the credit for stuff that other people did, like providing PPE to states, which governors were doing. So I thought it was like, it was an unfortunate and really sad view into the next hour and a half.
Yeah, and then Pence tried to bring up swine flu.
Oh my God, it was
God,
so weak.
what? In what world do they think that's a good idea?
I know.
I mean, it's like, yeah, well, you messed up with the response to swine flu. It's like, yeah, like, well, what is it, like 15,000 people died of swine flu? Which,
Yeah, it was like,
is terrible, of
Yeah.
course. One is too many, but like a flu that infected far more people than COVID has so far, only killed like 15,000 people. And then his whole argument was, well, if this was COVID, then it would have been really bad. And it's like, okay, and if my aunt was a man, she'd be my uncle. What's your point? like, yeah. If it was COVID, then they probably would have spent more time listening to experts. Like, if it was COVID, they would have listened to scientists when they said, hey, this is dangerous and it's airborne. And they would have done something about it. Like, it's such a non-point. It's such a red herring. I mean,
yeah, I thought the same thing. I was like, that, it really is a red herring. But yeah, because in some world we're supposed to respond to every disease with exactly the same intensity. If you guys had if this had been COVID and you guys didn't shut down the economy because no one was dying from this disease,
yeah,
it's just absolutely crazy.
Harris could have really been stronger during a lot of parts. Really, like, one of the things that kind of, made my expectations go down was at the beginning of the debate before it had started. I was listening to some analysis. I think it was like on I think I watched it on like NBC or CNN or one of those. And people were talking about how they'd been talking to people in the Harris camp, and they had said that her strategy is not to spend a lot of time fact checking. And I was like, I think that's a bad idea. Like, that was exactly what I heard when it was Joe Biden. Like, the strategy was not to spend time fact checking, and I thought it was a bad idea back then, and I ended up being right. Like, when they lie, call them out, state the facts, make sure people know how disingenuous and full of crap they are. In fact, Pence was so full of crap he attracted flies.
Okay. I can't talk about the fly.
I can.
I think it got stuck. That's my hypothesis. It was stuck.
Waiter, there's a fly in my bullshit.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, there were a few things
that, for 2.5 minutes. Like, I was texting my brother, and like 2.5 minutes later, it's still on there. I'm just like, oh my God, what's going on? Like,
the most content fly in the universe. Just somehow flies never sit still except during a president or a vice presidential debate.
And the part that I love the most is the fact that it went on his head right as he was trying to explain how institutional racism doesn't exist. Like,
that bullshit-o-meter. Yeah.
Exactly.
The ultimate.
It's like, there's, this is one of those places where, that really annoys me, because there are certain things that through academic study we have confirmed a long time ago.
Yeah.
That is still controversial in the United States. Like, the fact that there are institutional barriers that disproportionately affect African Americans and other people of color, that's just established fact. Like, you can look at research studies. It is scientific fact. Denying it is akin to denying climate change. Oh, wait, they do that too.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. The moment when he denied climate change, he said, quote, "Now with regard to climate change, the climate is changing, but the issue is, what's the cause and what do we do about it? President Trump has made it clear that we're going to continue to listen to the science." It's like,
Bullshit.
you are, yeah. I love the climate is changing, but we don't know what the cause is.
He said he doesn't like. Trump specifically said, "I don't think the science knows." Like,
Yeah.
he said that.
Yeah.
He said that. How are you going to sit there and say that we're going to listen to the science?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God. Like, the thing about Pence is that, and this is something that I think is really important to bring home. Pence is Donald Trump, but he speaks pretty.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he is just as much of a liar as Donald Trump. He is just as amoral as Donald Trump. He's just good at saying it with a smile. He's just good at making you like him while he lies to your face and stabs you in the back.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, he's perfected little niceties that make, the delivery of his horrible garbage a little bit more easy to take. One thing I wanted to ask about was the other more memeable moment was the few times that Kamala specifically was like, "I'm speaking." What did you think about that? When I watched it, I was tainted because I watched it after the debate. I was tainted by all the social media reaction to it.
Yeah.
But then in retrospect, I had kind of a different perspective. So I wanted to get your thoughts before I shared.
So I think that people made too much out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I would say that the first time she did it, I thought, in my mind, I was thinking, okay, so she's making it clear to Mike Pence that he's not going to act like Donald Trump did in the last debate.
Sure.
And I was like, okay, that's good. Basically establish the clear rules and basically make it very clear, like, you're not going to misbehave like your childish president. So, I don't think that it's something that, it's not something that made me jump for joy every time she did it, but I thought it was, I personally thought it was a good strategy because it was establishing the rules and establishing that she wasn't going to be talked over.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. At the time, it felt like she was going for the points, because she would say I'm speaking and then pause for a while. It was really awkward. She would it would be a second or two before she would then continue speaking.
See, I can forgive that because I know, when I'm teaching and someone interrupts me, or I get interrupted in some way, I always need to take a second to remember what I was saying. So that's what I chalk that up to.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that makes sense. And what I thought about in retrospect was actually when you are being interrupted regularly, and I know that a lot of the cheers for this, for her response, were from people decrying mansplaining. And when you're interrupted, or expect to be interrupted, which she clearly was, it can be a really powerful tool to make that awkward for the other person.
Yeah.
It can be a really powerful tool to ask someone why their off-color joke is funny, because it's awkward. It clearly is a disincentive for that bad behavior. Yeah. So in either case, I think whether it was just because she needed to collect her thoughts or as a strategy, I thought it went well.
Yeah.
It felt a little bit weird at the time because in my mind I had all of these positive responses about girl power and stuff like that. So I was like, oh, is she just going for that? But at the time she wouldn't have been known that any of that was going to occur necessarily.
Yeah.
So
again, I just viewed it as she's establishing the ground rules. You're not going to treat me like Trump treated Biden.
Yeah, which I thought was really strong and powerful. Yeah. And ultimately he didn't. He did interrupt her, but only apparently around 10 times versus Trump's 71 times interrupting Biden.
Yeah. And the last point that I want to make is I do want to very briefly make a point about sexism.
Mm-hmm.
because I remember watching the debate and sitting there thinking, oh my God, she's being so milquetoast. Like, you know, there's so many places that she could have very clearly and very forcefully challenged Pence on ridiculous things he was saying.
And she has the skills to do it.
Yeah, and she has the skills to do it. And I was thinking, come on, what's holding you back? And then I heard that there were apparently these interviews with a bunch of undecided voters that were saying, oh, she came across as really abrasive. And I was like, seriously? Seriously?
Damn it.
Okay, Joe Biden straight up told Donald Trump to shut up. And all she did was say, excuse me, please, I'm talking. It was like, so that's abrasive.
I thought she came off as fucking motherly.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I thought that was motherly, basically. So I just...
Jesus Christ.
You know, you can definitely make the point that Kamala Harris is absolutely a total chameleon when it comes to politics. She changes her views based on what's popular, not necessarily. She doesn't seem to have strong principles, and she does do a lot of non-answers and a lot of very standard politician-y platitudes and cliches. You can definitely make those criticisms of Kamala Harris, and I do, and I have. But I do think it is important to take a step back and realize that there are certain things that do hold her back. And there is this expectation that she needs to act a certain way or else she's going to be accused of being the angry black woman.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want anybody to think that I'm not acknowledging that. And that is really something that is incredibly destructive to discourse.
Mm-hmm.
And it does present a unique challenge for her that she does have to face.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, that's a really good point. I definitely wasn't thinking about all that as I was watching it. I did see some reactions talking about like her voice and how it was too shrill or something. I was just so pissed about that. I think that's such garbage.
Yeah.
And yeah, the fact that we hold female politicians to this ridiculous double standard where they're supposed to be somehow always the good guy, but also, still be as effective as all their male counterparts. It's another way in which we put women at an incredible disadvantage because we both hold them to a higher and lower standard in all things. Fuck sex.